This is an example, I think, of where the industry, through COSIA, has tried to look ahead and anticipate where things might be going and take a very proactive stance, I guess, in developing guidelines for operators. This work was done before there was anything public in terms of the draft TMF document that was put out by ASRD recently. And it's focused on thinking about what we can do with performance management of fluid fine tailings deposits. The title is long, but it's purposeful to try and capture some of the aspects of what we're going to talk about. So today, I'll give you, this guideline is available on COSIA's website. You can go get the full version and get the full idea of what's happening there. But for the purposes of today, we're going to focus on a couple of aspects. One is why do we have the guidelines? And then a very important discussion on what we mean by progress towards closure of any of our soft materials. Then we're going to talk a bit about the tailings performance management process, and then finish up with what are some aspects of the management plan. So the guidelines are intended to give mining operators some direction on how to create fluid fine tailings management plans that are consistent with Directive 74 or its successor, consistent with tailings management framework, and consistent with other government policy and regulations. It was a bit of a moving target because we didn't know where, and still don't know entirely, where some of these regulations are headed. So we were hoping to do as maybe to change Wayne Gretzky's comment a little bit. We wanted to go not where the puck was going, but where the puck should go, which is a little bit different. And the purpose of a fluid fine tailings management plan is to facilitate closure of oil sand mines by accelerating conversion of fluid fine tailings into a stable closure landscape. Now, there's been a lot of work on that last item, starting before, but with the tailings roadmap, and then going through a couple of more cycles in different documents that have come out from COSIA. And there's now, I think, a very good set of objectives of reclamation and closure objectives. They're included in this document. We don't have the time to go over them here today, but they are of interest. Just to context so that various documents are available to the industry. The one highlighted in red here is the one we're talking about today. Those on the left-hand side of the screen are COSIA documents that have been produced to try and give some direction to industry. There's the technical guide for fluid fine tailings management. It talks about all the technical aspects. Then there's the management guide, and then there's also a guide to audit and assessing oil sands fluid fine tailings performance. So the guys that got together on this to put this document together really felt that it was important that there be an audit process. And I'm sorry I forgot to thank my co-authors here. There's a group of 4 people that put this document together. Richard Dawson with Norwest, Brian Watts with Clone Quick and Berger, Al Hyman, who we've heard from at the conference already, and myself. And I'll give some acknowledgments to other people that provided input later on. So to me, this is kind of the most important part of this talk that you get. And it is important, and it's important from not only in understanding the definitions, but also in the context of what is coming out in the tailings management framework. So the authors, we spent probably 8 solid hours debating this one slide. And it was a lot of hard slogging, and it finally ended up at something that was fairly straightforward. But we're proposing that we recognize 2 different kinds of fluid fine tailings. We call them Condition 1, Condition 2. So Condition 1 are fluid fine tailings that are in their final position in the closure landscape. They've had everything done to them that's going to be done to them. They are on a trajectory to being reclaimed. All they need is time, as defined by the closure plan, as defined by commitments to the regulators. Condition 2 fluid fine tailings are those that need processing or reprocessing or some kind of treatment, some magical dust, as Brent was saying, that we could sprinkle on them. They may not be in their final position in the closure landscape, and they may or may not, well, they're probably not on a trajectory to being reclaimed. So we think it's important to make this fundamental distinction between these two types of materials, because when we go through and treat oil sands tailings, we don't necessarily produce something that's ready right away that second to be reclaimed. So we need to make this distinction between materials that are on their way and we're just going to give them some time to get there, and materials that definitely need other treatment. Now, what are the implications of this? Well, with the first group, all we really need to do is monitor their behavior with time. So we have a commitment to the regulator that they will behave in a certain way, and we'll monitor it to make sure that they behave in a certain way. And if they don't, we'll talk about that, what we're going to do in that case in a little while. For the condition 2 material, we need to monitor and manage the volume of that material with time, and this is one of the concepts that's come into the tailings management framework, which I think is a really good one. The operator is going to need to commit to a certain volume profile with the regulator, and they're going to need to ensure that they stay within those regulatory commitments. And if you've read the TMF, you will see that volume profile is allowed to grow for a while, and then it has to peak and decrease. And by the end of, or within a certain amount of time after the end of mining, that volume is supposed to be zero. So clearly we're not going to be able to meet that kind of volume profile unless we have active involvement in converting condition 2 fluid fine tailings into condition 1 fluid fine tailings. So here's an example of what we're talking about by condition 1 fluid fine tailings. In this case, it happens to be some material that's in an in-pit situation. It's some kind of tailings. That might be TT, it might be centrifuged MFT, but it's some kind of tailings on which we've managed to get a cap which has some loading on it, which is consolidating, and essentially that's where it's going to be in the closure landscape, and we're just waiting for it to get through its consolidation process. An example of condition 2 fluid fine tailings are all the tailings that we have in our existing tailings ponds. We place them in cells, we place them on beaches, that material segregates. Some of the fines is captured, as has been discussed already, in the sand, and about half of it ends up in the pond. So that half of it that is captured in the sand is condition 1 fluid fine tailings, and the other half that ends up in the pond is condition 2 fluid fine tailings. I suppose I should correct myself. Once it's captured in the sand, it's not fluid anymore. Okay, what's our tailings performance management process? Well, first of all, we've got all the normal planning things that go on in a mine. We have to characterize our ore body, develop a mine plan, develop a tailings plan, a water management plan, closure and reclamation plan. Hopefully, all these plans are well integrated. They talk to one another. There's nothing there that doesn't work in the overall planning process, and the plans transition seamlessly one into another. Now we know that's the perfect world, and it doesn't always work exactly like that, but that's the ideal that we're striving towards. So now if we focus down in on the actual tailings performance management process, what we are proposing is what's shown on this flowchart here. So we're starting off with our closure commitments at the top, and my apologies to the guys on this side of the room. You're going to have to kind of strain your eyes on this side, I guess. So we prepare our site-wide tailings plan, and then we prepare a fluid fine tailings management plan that is going to get submitted to the regulator for approval. And it'll be whatever it is. It'll contain some components that we're going to talk about in a minute, and then the regulator, we'll give it to the regulator, and they'll decide, do we want to approve it, or are they approving it or not? If they don't approve it, we'll go back through the cycle again and revise the plan. But if they do, which hopefully we get to that point sooner or later, then there's two ways of going. For material that we know is going to end up as a condition 1 fluid fine tailings, we're going to deposit those in certain areas, and then we're going to monitor and report on their condition. And as long as they continue to behave the way they're supposed to, we just keep on going. Eventually, we get to a progressive reclamation state, and at some point that we're ready for final reclamation and closure. If they don't behave properly, we come back through this part of the loop and apply certain mitigating measures, which have already been defined. We go back, talk to the regulator again, and go back through the cycle. For other materials, such as they're going in tailings ponds, we know we're not producing condition 1 tailings, we're producing condition 2. What we're doing is monitoring the volume profile of that. As long as our volume profile stays within our commitments, then everybody's happy, I guess. And at some point, we need to take that material and treat it in some way and deposit it elsewhere so that we turn it into condition 1 fluid fine tailings. So the idea is that we're trying to get to a condition where everything becomes condition 1 fluid fine tailings and ends up on a trajectory to a closure plan. What are the elements of our plan? We have some general description of the ore body, the tailings streams, the tailings deposits, where we're going to put material. The guts of it is that we have to say where we are going to put condition 1 fluid fine tailings and how it is going to perform. And we need to say the same about the condition 2, where are we going to put it and what sort of volume profile will we have. For the condition 1 material, there will be a need to measure the behavior of that material. This chart here gives you an idea of some of the primary performance measurements for each deposit type. And we don't really have time to go through all these deposit types. I think Al Hyman talked about them the other day, but they're all the ones that are under use now. We've included at the end a category down here of deep, low SFR deposits, not because we want them, but because we have some of them. And maybe at some time in the future we'll be able to produce those kind of deposits as a condition 1 rather than condition 2. Okay, so the idea is if we did nothing with our fluid fine tailings, we would follow a profile like this. We would just keep accumulating condition 2 fluid fine tailings, which has happened to a large extent in the past. What we're attempting to do is at some early point to start treating that material so that we start producing condition 1 fluid fine tailings, which also transitions into solid materials, and then this remaining profile of condition 2 fluid fine tailings is the one that we make the commitment to the regulator, in which we meet. And you notice that goes to 0 about 5 years after the end of mining. Other important aspects of the management plan: we need to report on the behavior and then compare behavior to what was predicted, which is what we mean by performance. We make a distinction between those two words. We measure in conformance with, hopefully with some protocol that gets put out. There is a kind of a draft out there which hasn't been finalized or hasn't been published yet. We report to the regulator on a regular basis, maybe every 5 years if everything's going fine. If not, more frequently. And then, as I mentioned before, we have an independent performance assessment, so that the government and the management of the company can be assured that what's being put forward by the technical people is in fact is accurate. And there's guidelines in both the MAC and from COSIA on this independent performance assessment. Our stewardship is whether or not we're in compliance with our plan. So is the condition 2 fluid fine tailings within the profile that we've committed to the regulator, and is the condition 1 fluid fine tailings actually behaving within the range of behavior that we said it would, or better? And obviously we need to look at both absolute value and trends. So here's an example of something that might come up on somebody's plan. They've got and this is in regards to condition 2 volume profile. So the upper red line is the upper end of a range of predicted behavior for the volume profile. And the green line with the yellow dots is the actual. So at some point, even though we're still in compliance, we need to recognize that we have a trend that may take us out of compliance, and we need to do something about it so that we stay within compliance. We're compliant with the commitments made to the regulator. So this is an adaptive management process, and we need to use it any time when we don't have a perfect ability to predict the future, which is almost all the time. Adaptive management says we have contingency plans to deal with foreseeable ways in which we might not perform the way we expect to. Those contingency plans must be practical, we must be able to implement them within the needed time frame. And the contingency plans must be implemented in a way to help us stay within compliance. So that's all I'm going to say about the document right now. There's quite a bit more information, detail, but some other information that we haven't had time to cover here. I will acknowledge people who've been both technical and non-technical reviewers for us. This is a list of our technical reviewers. These guys had the job of listening patiently to what our 4-person team had put together and critique that for sensibility more than anything. We also had a couple of regulatory reviewers, Jim DeLay and Wayne Clifton. Jim DeLay, I got to say, is the most polite person I've ever met. And his background on that, it was essential that he be the person he is to have the background that he had. His and Wayne Clifton's insights on the regulatory aspects of what we were doing were really important. So thank you to those people.